Welcome! Today we're going to face off on a very serious topic. Which was the better decade, the 80s or the 90s? Because what else would we be doing at work? You're listening to Open Here, a podcast produced by PAC TV. I'm Mark McKinley.
I'm Tiff Phillips.
Let's get started. Tiffany, I have here in my very hands the script from the podcast Let's Go Back to the 90s. Now, it was very interesting, very thought-provoking, but one thing piqued my interest. In your little intro, you mentioned, I want to go back to drinking Ecto Cooler and watching Power Rangers.
Oh, you're going to call me out on the Ecto Cooler, aren't you?
Tiffany.
There was Ecto Cooler in the 90s?
But where did it come from?
It
came from the 80s.
Oh,
That's
Exhibit
right.
A, Exhibit A.
And to signify the 80s, I'm going to do something a la David Letterman. I'm going to just simply flick this script.
It took me like 5 hours to write that script. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
But we're going to insert glass breaking here.
Okay.
Okay, there's the glass break. So going through your script, you mentioned various topics. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to bring up various things from the 80s that I think are better than your 90s.
Bring it.
So you were focusing on music. Now, I think the music of the 80s was a whole lot better. Rock music as a whole, come on. You've got the anthems of Journey, Steve Perry belting out those wonderful notes. Did you have that in the 90s? Did you have something to grasp onto?
We had angsty teenager music, and we had Kurt Cobain mumbling into a microphone, which I appreciated a lot more. I love Steve Perry, don't get me wrong.
Steve Perry would never wear a dirty sweater.
Because the 90s don't care. They don't care what people think about them. They're confident.
Another thing to kind of like go along that same frame of mind, that's where heavy duty, like heavy metal and hair bands, you wouldn't have Guns N' Roses. You wouldn't have, Rat. We hear Rat all the time on TV and commercials now.
Hair bands bother me so much. Every song sounds the same. They don't have anything besides, every rose has its thorn. There was no meaningful songs that ever came out of that genre. It was all watered down about drugs and girls, and that was it. The only thing that came out of hair bands was Tommy Lee. That was the only good thing that came out of hair bands.
Don't forget, Metallica got their name.
Oh, that's what you're going with, Metallica?
Well, but here's the thing. Metallica did get a little, slap in the face with their Grammy nomination because they were up for the Grammys. It was the first time we had heavy metal band performance. Jethro Tull wins it. Jethro Tull, there's nothing metal about a flute. Come on. And you cannot mention music in the 80s without focusing on the birth of MTV, music television. I mean, I remember when music television, MTV, wasn't 24 hours a day. I mean, they would sign off at midnight, and you'd get to see the Moon Man, plant the flag on the moon at night, and then you'd get to see him again first thing in the morning when they'd start broadcasting again.
MTV in the 80s was like 3 Cyndi Lauper videos and like 10 taglines by a couple of one-hit wonders.
But without MTV, we would not have been exposed to the wide variety of music that was out there. And that just continued to grow all throughout the 80s because then as rap was becoming influential, they focused on showing more rap videos during the 80s. And we were exposed to a wider range of music other than having our radios, dialed in on one particular station and we never touched the knob. Regardless.
Although MTV started in the 80s, I just feel like it evolved more in the 90s. I mean, we had these music videos that were basically turned into mini movies, these massive productions. There were millions and millions of dollars poured into these amazing music videos. Plus, we had TRL. We had an after-school program devoted to the top 10 pieces of music at the time. It was an incredible time.
Did you actually learn something from Carson Daly?
No, he's cardboard.
With that, once again, we do our David Letterman and then the glass breaks. All right, so let's carry on. Toys. The toys of the 80s were 10 times better. You didn't have glitzy neon everywhere. Every toy I can remember of the 90s.
There's nothing wrong with neon. It's wonderful.
Well, granted, it's for safety purposes, but, the toys of the 80s, you had G.I. Joe figures, you had Transformers, you had, think back, everyone's, playing Pokemon whatever on their phone. Back in the day, I had Mattel electronic games. I had electronic football. And what was the football? It was a red LED light line that traveled all around. My players were red little lines that I manipulated around. That's what we had. That was great. That was perfect for the car ride over to Grandma's house.
But you lived in primitive times where the resolution, the graphics became so much better in the 90s. We had better game consoles. We had 64. Nintendo 64, Mark.
But before there was Nintendo 64, there was the Nintendo Entertainment System.
We still have one.
See, you still got one. But also think about that's when you actually had arcades. Arcades were a thing back in the 80s. I remember collecting all my quarters from the spare change from my lunch every day, and I had a nice little stack that I could play, Double Dragon at least 3 or 4 times, for that week, and I was happy.
Arcades are great. I appreciate the rise of the arcades, but the home systems became better. They gypped you. I mean, how many quarters did you waste in your lifetime compared to I could just sit at home and play? The snacks are better at home. The prizes weren't that great at the arcades. My mom would probably make me better prizes than the ones I'd find at the arcade. I don't want to spend 600 tickets on a stuffed animal.
Come on, don't you think that the nachos at an arcade are better at an arcade? They taste better.
The pizza was better.
The orange is much brighter of that nacho cheese. So that's my toy rebuttal. And with that, there's our little glass break. All right, let's carry over to food. The 80s had a lot of interesting things that were developed. McRibs became a thing. Chicken McNuggets became a thing. Those were wonderful things to access through that drive-through window. We've got, Blizzards from Dairy Queen. That was like the first time we ever experienced mixing different types of candy bars in with vanilla ice cream, and to have it thick enough that you had to eat it with a spoon. I mean, they even served it to you upside down, Tiffany.
We had the McFlurry. I mean, the McFlurry was invented in the 90s, and I'm seriously thinking the ice cream at McDonald's is 10 times better than Dairy Queen.
Oh, you've got to be kidding
And
me.
it hurts me to say that because I actually worked at Dairy Queen for 5 years.
When can you even find a working ice cream machine in a McDonald's
that's
today?
fair. You got me there.
Come on. But, we had the evolution of mall food courts. We had that whole mall experience. You go, you play the arcade, you're already filled up on nachos, but you need something to kind of settle your stomach down. So you'd go, experience a wide variety of foods, whether you want Italian or Chinese food or anything that you can think of. It was available at that mall food court.
Yeah, I know, but I've gotten food poisoning at a mall food court before, so there's that.
All right. Well, I'll give that one to you. And with that,
oh, here we go. It was whack.
luckily I don't get hurt when it hits me.
I don't know if paper cuts are considered workman's comp.
So, the movies of the 80s. The movies of the 80s were much better, in my opinion, more thought-provoking. Remakes are still coming out, just due to those wonderful movies that came out in the 80s. Top Gun. Top Gun inspired so many young men and women to sign up for the U.S. Navy because they wanted to be Tom Cruise.
And then Tom Cruise destroyed it in A Few Good Men in the 90s and revealed the travesty that is the military at times.
Yeah, but he was a lawyer. In the 80s, he was a fighter pilot. There's a difference. Can you handle that truth?
I handled it.
All right. But, we had the Ghostbusters, one of the best Star Wars movies ever. The Empire Strikes Back.
Fighting with Star Wars. I can't.
Come on. That was a product of the 80s.
But we had Scream. Like, it totally took the horror franchise, the horror genre, and turned it on its knees. It talked about different tropes. It made fun of itself. It was smart. It was, for the first time, I think 90s movies proved that teenagers weren't idiots.
Drew Barrymore, who got her start during the 80s. Little Drew Barrymore, who we loved in E.T., ends up getting the wrong end of the knife in Scream.
Because that's life, Mark. That's life. 90s made it real.
All right. Well.
And also we had Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll give you that one. Television. Television in the 80s was essential. Saturday morning cartoons were a thing. I remember getting up early, having my bowl of the sugariest cereal known to man, and, eating it and watching all the wonderful Saturday morning cartoons. But think about the cartoons that I had. That was my little after-school treat. I was able to watch a variety of different animated shows. And then you had the wonderful primetime shows. The A-Team. Come on. Don't you love it when a plan comes together? Come on.
Okay, so Saturday morning cartoons started in the 70s. We've all had Saturday morning cartoons if you were born in the 70s on. We had Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon was the most incredible thing. Rugrats, Doug, All Real Monsters. Some incredibly written, mature cartoons that were for all ages. We also had some great other morning cartoons. We had the X-Men cartoon series, which was incredible. The original Batman, super dark, super enthralling. We also had Salute Your Shorts, which was incredible. We had Rocko's Modern Life. We had Snick. Have you ever heard of Snick?
Snick, a variation of Nickelodeon, which started in the 80s. Where do you think slime came from? You can't do that on television. That was a quintessential show for an 80s child like myself. I didn't want to get slimed. I didn't want to, to this day, I still know the name Kevin Kubicheski.
That takes me
and
back.
Moose. Moose getting, slimed.
And then for those listening at home, Snick was actually, for who don't know, Snick was a Saturday night program, Saturday Night Nickelodeon, where there was teens would sit on a big orange couch and there'd be 4 TV shows. Are You Afraid of the Dark being the scariest thing I'd ever seen growing up. Maybe a cartoon, Clarissa Explains It All, and there would be one other random wild card show, just in case you didn't know. It was the epitome of my childhood. My brother used to make us kids' cuisine meals in the microwave, and we used to eat it off a piano bench and watch Snick for 2 hours, and I got to stay up late. It was the most amazing part of my childhood.
Okay. But it was on Nickelodeon. All right, here we go. So, lastly, we've got all these different things that we talked about, but what was the key thing about the 1980s was convergence of all of these different types of media or food or what have you. Here's an example. Let's take your precious Ecto Cooler. Ecto Cooler, which really was a byproduct of Slimer, who really gained popularity in the real Ghostbusters animated series on television, which came from a movie, Ghostbusters. And would you know it, who are you going to call? You're going to call those Ghostbusters. So that popular song. This was like the ideal time of the 80s. They really perfected tying everything together. So G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe, you had the toys. You had an animated show. I can't think of a G.I. Joe food, but they also spun off. They did a movie, animated movie, mind you, but an animated movie. But that was kind of like the unique thing about the '80s is that you had all these different influences tied together in some way, shape, or form. So you could live, 24/7 Star Wars. So you could eat your 3PO cereal and listen to the music and watch. I prefer Droids as an animated series as opposed to the Ewoks animated series.
Oh, come on. The Ewoks was amazing.
Droids was pretty cool. They had a Boba Fett in there. Come on. So that was kind of like, that's if you want to encapsulate the 80s, think of it as that convergence of all these different types of media and, food and music and movies, television. They're all tied in together under a certain property.
Now, real question. Did the 80s start with the Happy Meal toy being from like a movie or a TV show, or was it just a random toy? Do you remember?
It was kind of like a mix. So before, I remember the Happy Meal toys being McDonald's centric.
Yeah.
So
right. You had like the Hamburglar.
I had a Bendy, Ronald McDonald.
Yeah.
And everything was that. And then it wasn't until the 80s came about when they started doing these movie tie-ins and they would license different toys to be included in the Happy Meals.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember going to places like Burger King and you could buy like a Ninja Turtle VHS with your value meal. Like it came with it. And it had like the cups that went with it. So we had it in the 90s too. And Nickelodeon did a great job of that. It was the show. Then they would make it into the movie. Then the cartoon series. And then you can get the watch. I remember Harriet the Spy was one of those things. Also, there was I think Harriet the Spy, you could get a scratch and sniff ticket. So you could smell the things as they were coming on TV. It was incredible. So we had it in the 90s too. 80s didn't have everything.
True. All right. Well, I like to think that I've got certain points across. Let this be the signifying last little glass breaking. And the important thing is, Tiffany, even though I love my 80s, you love your 90s, we're both still friends after all
of
this.
Of course, we're still friends, Mark.
Excellent. Glad to hear. Well, thank you for taking this trip down memory lane with us. You've been listening to Open Here, a podcast produced by the local scene of Plymouth area community television. PAC TV is the community media provider for Massachusetts towns of Plymouth, Pembroke, Kingston, and Duxbury. To see more of our content, visit pactv.org/thelocalscene. I'm Mark McKinley.
And I'm Tiff Phillips.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Hi friends, if you like this video by The Local Scene, share the love and give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe.